Hi everyone! We thought we'd do this video on what it's like to run a small fashion brand at the age of 23. So we've split up the video into multiple categories, so I'll start first with the concept. Here we go.
What is your concept?
The concept of Reconsidered is all about encouraging people to use what they already own. It's all about the idea that one thing can become another thing. So with our products, we source pre-loved fabrics and clothing, and we turn those things into new things. So a curtain might become a pair of dungarees. And then with our custom service, it's a similar process, but customers send us the clothes that they don't wear anymore, and we send them back renewed, reworked and repaired.
What is your product?
Our product, we have many products. We sell ready-to-wear clothing and accessories, and that involves pyjamas, daywear, bags, hats, eye masks, and then our custom service involves anything that you might have in your wardrobe that you don't wear anymore. So when you're starting to think of a product that you want to make, it's really important, I think, to start with what you want to say and what your mission is, and that's why we always start with like the original item that we're turning into something new. And then in terms of aesthetic and how you want to design that product, it should be what you should go, I think, with your gut feeling and what feels right to you and what things you like. Look around you, look at what you own, what you want, and I think if it comes from there, then your products will always be really genuine.
Why did you start business?
I actually started the business kind of by chance in a way. I had been upcycling just for friends and family and for myself, posting it on Instagram, and then when I came up with the idea that I could create the service that I was doing for friends and family but as a real service, I applied and I got a grant, and because of that grant and the mentorship that came with it, I was able to actually turn a sort of hobby into a business. This doesn't have to be the way you go about doing things. You can have that business idea that you want to turn into a reality, but ultimately the important thing, sadly, is getting that initial bit of funding, time to be able to like make it happen. And I guess also the important thing is to recognise why you are starting that business. If it is just purely for money, that's fine if that's what motivates you, but if there are other things that motivate you, then that also, remember to keep that at the core, at the centre of things, and that will always kind of drive your vision.
How did you evolve your concept since it started?
So the concept of Reconsidered has, in many different small ways, changed a lot over time. It's always maintained its core values and its mission, but I think they've become deeper and more ingrained, and we've applied that mission to many areas of the business that we weren't doing necessarily at the beginning. So for example, we weren't using all those little scraps of fabric that we were cutting off or that came off when we were sewing or overlocking, but once I'd saved them all up, we turned them into our earrings, and we make key rings now and all sorts of little accessories from those bits of scrap fabrics. And then as we keep going, there are so many more elements of the production that we want to make sure are zero waste and that we're doing in the absolute perfect way. Obviously this takes time, and that's the whole point of something, when it can evolve and change and be better. And I think if you want to make sure that your concept and your business stays current and up to date and exciting and relevant, it's important to always look out for inspiration and keep researching, keep reading, keep watching, keep going out and meeting people. And then the other thing I'd say to make sure that you do evolve is that there should be points in your year, in your calendar, that you set out to have a day of reflection, so that you can look back and see what went really well and what didn't, and then naturally things are going to evolve and change.
How much did you prepare before starting the company?
So when I applied to the grant, when I first started thinking about Reconsidered as a business opportunity, the application process was really, really long, and it made me think about things that I hadn't thought about before, such as finance and what I imagined we could make in the future and how we were going to fund it, who was going to work on it with me. And so I think applying to things like that, speaking with people about your business opportunity, makes you prepare, because they ask the tricky questions. They want you to have answers to things that are sometimes a little bit difficult to approach yourself. But it's really important that you do sit down and have those questions and get people to ask you them, because that's the best way to prepare, I think.
How do you make your brand recognisable?
I think making your brand recognisable is different for every brand. Some brands, it's their aesthetic. Some brands, it's their mission. Some brands, it's the people that wear the clothes. And I think for us, it's definitely our dedication to helping people address their own waste more than we encourage buying more. And I think that as its kind of unique differentiator is really exciting, and people remember it. When we've been in pop-up shops, having the stories behind the clothes that we make always resonates with people. And so I think if you can have that one thing in your brand that makes you different from everything else, and everything in your brand doesn't have to be absolutely different from everyone else, but if you can have that one thing that makes people remember you over the other people, then that's really important.
How many pieces do you put in a collection?
It really varies. We try and keep it quite small. One, because we are really small and there's so much we can deal with, but also because we're wanting to make products that will sell. We don't want to be sitting on stock forever. We don't want to waste anything. The idea also is that potentially something we make might in the future be turned into something different, and it can have a new life, and therefore it won't be wasted. But yeah, we do try to keep our collection small. They ranged, like our last collection was about 70 items total. So yeah, I think it's really good to start small and build up from there, because you don't want to invest lots in products that aren't going to sell.
How do you price things?
Pricing took me a really long time to figure out. I don't think I've mastered it yet either. With the service, if you're doing something custom, it's very hard to price things based on the time you think it will take you to make, because obviously customers do expect you to have a price at the beginning, not at the end. No one wants to go in blind saying, yeah, I'll pay whatever. And so that's always been really, really tricky. But you need to keep in mind your customer, who you're targeting, what they can afford, and then also whether you're covering all your costs and a little bit more, if not a lot more. Margins vary, and it's about having a balance across your products. Some you might have a bigger margin, you might be making slightly more profit on some, and some you might be making slightly less of a profit. We try to stick to a 40% margin at least, if not more, on all our products. And I'd say, yeah, it's one of the hardest things. I think it's also really good sometimes if your audience or your customers don't understand why you've priced things a certain way. It's really good to be transparent about exactly why, talking about the fact that you have to make a living yourself. You can't just price things at cost is also a really good discussion to start and have, I think. But yeah, I've got to say that is one of the hardest things. So now we're moving on to branding.
How did you decide on your branding aesthetic?
So deciding on the aesthetic for Reconsidered was definitely a gut feeling. It didn't involve much research or anything like that. It was more just experimentation, looking through colour palettes that appealed to me. I also looked at some of the clothing and fabrics that I'd already sourced right at the beginning, and saw sort of what were the trends and what were the things that appealed to me. I originally wanted to go for kind of dusty orange, so we obviously have this sort of dusty pink, and originally I wanted to go orange. I just love the colour orange, but I like it with a kind of a dusty overtone. But another similar brand to us already had that, and so I didn't want us to look too similar, and so I went with the pink. So if you're thinking about creating your brand aesthetic and concept, I do think it's important just to look around and see what you are naturally drawn to. There will be certain colours that appeal to you more than others, and then also it's really good to do your own research on brands that you really love and look at their website, look at their logo, look at their social media, and see what it is about them that makes you like them and want to look at them more. And then just sort of create some colour palettes and play with it. You also might want to ask people around you what appeals to them, which they like more, just sort of get that kind of feedback.
How do you manage being ethical and sustainable?
I think being ethical and sustainable go hand in hand. I don't think either should be without the other. It seems kind of hypocritical to be a sustainable brand but unethical and not paying people properly. But at the beginning of starting a brand, that's always really difficult, because to be ethical and sustainable, there's an added cost to both of those things, and so your prices then have to reflect that, and people have to understand that. And I think if you tell it in the right way and you present yourself in the right way, then it's justified. But I think it's also, being ethical and sustainable is really hard to achieve 100%. There's always something that could be better, and I think start off bit by bit, but always keep in the back of your mind, how could I do that in a more sustainable way? How could I source that in a better way? How could I make sure that everyone involved feels valued? And as long as those questions are always in the back of your mind, then you can always improve. But definitely don't be too hard on yourself on being the absolute best of the best, because that takes time to master, and it also costs a lot. And, you know, making sure that all of your zips and buttons and everything right at the beginning is perfect is hard.
How often do you produce your collections?
So we don't produce collections more than 4 times a year, and we also might release one product on its own if we want to showcase it and we've made it and we've developed it, and it doesn't go necessarily with the whole launch of the collection. I think especially if you're thinking of doing something sustainably, it's important to be really considered about when you're going to be releasing new products and how often, because that's obviously one of the biggest problems with fast fashion and the current state of the fashion industry, is that, you know, trend cycles are so fast, and that, you know, the constant new collections, it obviously encourages overconsumption. So yeah, we try and stick to kind of 4 maximum, and we don't necessarily have a rule for that. So now we're going to move on to production.
How do you produce your garments?
We produce our garments by first sourcing all the pre-loved fabrics ourselves, and then we have a group of local seamstresses who will sort of take on parts of the collection, and then sometimes we also produce stuff in-house. I think this is one of the hardest parts, especially if you're trying to do things really sustainably and really ethically, and also affordably. There are small factories, large factories in the UK that you can use and you can approach, but for us it's really difficult to find something that works, because we are upcycling, and therefore there's lots of unpicking and everything's different and it's a lot more complicated. But there are really good ethical factories in the UK that you can use, but you just need to make sure you do your research and that you ask all the right questions and that you're really thorough, and that you don't just sort of turn a blind eye, but you do ask.
How long is production time?
Production time really varies. We are usually always on a very tight schedule. We're really trying to work on giving ourselves more time to produce things, but usually the design process will be about a month and a half or something. Sourcing will take another month, and then production will be another month, and then we'll shoot photos and then we'll release them as soon as we can on the website.
How much do you pay for your fabrics?
So for our service, fabrics are always free, because obviously we are upcycling what our customers send us. And then our products, sometimes we use donated fabrics, so people, as you can see behind me, people donate their curtains, duvet covers, old clothes, and we store them here. And then if they fit with a product that we're developing, or whether we look and we see that we've got a lot of something, we'll then turn it into a product. And then if it's not donated, then it really, really varies. We go to second-hand stores, charity shops. I look on eBay, anywhere selling second-hand fabrics. And yeah, so there's like a wealth of ways of sourcing pre-loved fabrics. So you can do that too, but there are also, if you want to use rolls of fabrics, there are lots of websites that stock dead stock fabric, which is a really good option if you really need rolls of fabric, but you want to do it in a sustainable, zero waste way.
What equipment do you use?
So we use the Juki sewing machine, and we use an Elna overlocker. They're both domestic, and that's something that I'd really like to invest in the future, is an industrial sewing machine and an industrial overlocker. I think sort of the quality and the speed at which we will be able to produce will be so much better. But the seamstresses that we use all have industrial sewing machines, so that makes things a lot easier. You can source relatively cheap sewing machines just to start off with. I had my Juki is quite elaborate and it has loads of different elements to it, but I started off with a really basic domestic sewing machine, and I think that's absolutely fine for producing samples and things to get you going, and you can find them for, you know, £200, decent ones, or free on Facebook Marketplace. You can also rent sewing machines. There's a really cool company called Library of Things, and you can rent a sewing machine for a week, and that might be a really good way just to introduce yourself and get yourself accustomed to using a sewing machine. So now we're moving on to investment.
How did you fund the beginning of the business?
So at the beginning of starting Reconsidered, as I said before, we got a grant, and the way we did this was we went through Innovate UK. They were holding an award called the Young Innovators Award, and it was for anyone who had a sort of disruptive, innovative idea, and it was £5,000 plus a year's living allowance for anyone under the age of, I think it was 30. I think they might have slightly increased the age for it now. I believe they do it every single year. And it's basically a cohort of people doing really different things. There were 3 of us in fashion, and the rest were medical, engineering, all sorts of stuff going on. So it was really wonderful also to meet people doing really different things, and it was interesting because quite a few people that you wouldn't expect actually had skills that you could learn from. And then it was a program that also included a mentor. So it's not, in terms of investment to begin with, it wasn't just the money that was important, it was having that network and the mentorship that really helped it get going. And then I also had a part-time job at the time, so the living allowance supplement was supplemented by that, and I was also in my final year at uni, so I had a student loan to keep me going. So obviously I was very lucky to have got that award, and it is highly competitive, and it also is based on what sort of portfolio they wanted to have, so I was lucky enough to apply at that time as well. And it's not the only way of securing funding. There are lots of charities that help with innovative enterprises that are about helping society or the environment. So if you do have that sort of a mission, then there are lots of places that are willing to help you start that. You can also look to, if you've gone to university, universities have a lot of support they can offer you. There's also charities such as the Prince's Trust that helps entrepreneurs launch and start their business. So yeah, I think it's mainly about doing the research and not thinking too soon that there's nothing out there, because there are lots of opportunities there. So now the last section is marketing.
How do you market yourself?
We market ourselves in lots of different ways. So our sales channels are through our website, on social media, Instagram, TikTok, now YouTube. And we also have taken part in pop-up shops and markets in London. It is really hard to find the thing that works really well for you, and I think throughout the year different things help at different times. But I think at the beginning it's about trying everything. Try pushing social media loads, try going to loads of pop-up shops, and then it really will depend on your product and what fits you.
How did you grow a following?
So we've literally just started our YouTube. We've also just started TikTok, and the main part of our following is on Instagram, because that's kind of where Reconsidered started. I feel way more comfortable on Instagram than I do on TikTok or YouTube or any of the others, but it's really important to try that and give it a go so that you can reach new audiences. And I think it's just about getting into a routine. It's about making sure that you're consistent and that you notice when things don't quite get the attention that you thought it would, and notice the things that do, and then do more of those things. But I think it's definitely a case of consistency and trial and error. And then I think it's also important to find your niche, your community. It's lucky that we have sustainable fashion as such a lovely community. There's so many other sustainable brands and people within the world of slow and circular fashion that want to boost each other up. And I think that's super important, to find your niche and to find the people that are interested in what you're doing for the very specific reason you're doing what you're doing.
Share what has worked and what hasn't.
There are so many things that haven't worked, and then there are quite a few things that have. And it's important not to feel defeated when things don't work the way they do. There's always something you can take from it. An example I could give is doing pop-up shops and markets, for example. There are some that work so well, and you meet amazing people who are super interested in what you're doing, and you make money on that day, and it was worth all the effort. And then some pop-up shops and some markets, you come away with nothing, and it doesn't work. And the people who've hosted the pop-up shop didn't fit you, and you won't ever know that until you've tried it. And so it's sort of similar to what I've said before. It's all trial and error, but it's really important not to be defeated and not to feel like, oh, well, then I may as well give up because that was a bad day, or that was a bad idea, or that was a bad investment, because you can always pick those things that did work. For example, even if you didn't sell anything one day at a market, you still met a load of people and you gave out your cards, and that's marketing, that's reaching more people. And so if you can find the moments that make it worth it, even on those bad days, then hold on to that. There have been products that I've made that haven't sold, or haven't sold for a very long time. I don't take things off the website, we don't tend to do sales, and so they just stay there until someone takes them. And I think that's quite a good approach to being, and also to maintaining your sustainability. And then when a product doesn't sell, and when you can see that it's not getting the interest you thought it was going to take, it's important to note down what wasn't quite right about that, and it's maybe a chance to ask your audience why they don't like something, or what they do like, or what they would like, because it's important not only to produce things that you want to make or you think your audience want, but what are your audience telling you that they want.
How did you make your website?
So we use Shopify. It's similar to all the other ones like Squarespace and Wix, and it's just really good for e-commerce because it has the shop part built into it. It's really easy to use, loads of templates, fun to customise. So yeah, just did it through that.
How do you use ads?
We used to use a few ads on Instagram. When we were launching a collection, I used to sponsor posts. We haven't really done that recently. It worked a couple of times when we used to do it, and then other times it just sort of didn't really work at all, and so I don't necessarily think it's the right approach for us, but I definitely think it's worth giving it a go. You don't have to spend much money on those social media, Facebook, Instagram ads at all, and you can tailor it to you.
How do you work with influencers?
So we've worked with a few micro-influencers, ones that are really dedicated to the sustainable fashion world and mission, and that's been really, really fun and successful in the past. We haven't done many recently, but it is something that we want to do this year, and we've got some plans for that. And it's a little bit daunting, I think, the idea and the prospect of reaching out to influencers, and sometimes they'll respond with an ask back that you can't afford, and that's okay. It's just a matter of finding those people that do work with you and that want to support you as well. But it's definitely important to find influencers that share similar values to you, and you're not just picking them because they have the biggest amount of followers. So I hope that you got some insight and that it was helpful. It's such a daunting thing to do, starting a business, and there's no way to do it. There's no perfect way, and it will be different for everybody, but that's what I did, and I hope that it was helpful. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any other questions about what it's like to run a small business, then let me know.